and welcome to the W Show with thanks to NAB. Sarah Olle here, just warming the host chair while Nat Edwards takes a much-deserved break, but in her usual seat, as she is every week, award-winning journalist Sarah Black. Hello to you, Sarah.
Hello, Sarah. Good to have you back.
Yeah, nice to be back. And Lib, nice to be with you. Our first show together, of course, Melbourne star defender Libby Birch.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me.
Now, you must be happy at the moment. Your Dees flying, 5 wins, just the 1 loss, in 3rd position, and again, looking like you're in premiership contention.
Yeah, it's been a really exciting start to the year. It's unbelievable to think we're at round 7, so it's not really the start of the year. It's like the middle of the year, nearing the end, which has just flown. We feel like we're growing nicely into the season, and we need to really put the foot down for the last couple of games, and then come finals, want to be in red-hot form.
Let's head to our NAB news now. And last Friday night, the inaugural Showdown, and didn't the Adelaide crowd come out? More than 20,000 there. And of course, some really close games across the weekend. And on Tuesday night, Hawthorn's Tegan Cunningham, well, she had her ban overturned. She is free to play in round 7. And some rising stars there, Emily Peace and Ella Roberts, who of course was the #1 pick in the WA draft pool. They are the rising star noms with thanks to NAB. And Sarah, you were at the Showdown. Tell us what it was like. The atmosphere looked incredible. There's something about Adelaide and women's footy. They just always turn out, don't they?
Yeah, it was a Port Adelaide home game, but that didn't stop the Adelaide fans from getting down to see a bit of history to be made. There were so many young kids in the crowd, you know, girls and boys alike. You know, Port Adelaide fans, they did the Never Tear Us Apart.
Love that.
Yeah, it was great. There was fireworks. There was, but there was also a lot of acknowledgement of women who had come before them in sporting history in South Australia. A nod to them, a nod to the future. It was a wonderful celebration of women's sport in the state.
We love that. And Libby, what you must love is the Dees last quarter against Fremantle, because at 3/4 time it was anyone's game, but then 4 unanswered goals in that final term to become 30-point victors. Was Mixtoneer fired up at 3/4 time? What was the magic potion?
No, Mix is he's very cool, calm and collected and quite measured at the breaks. And it just took us a little bit of time to crack open this game, and we didn't quite get the fluidity from our back half to our forward half happening throughout those first 3 quarters. And the wind played a massive part. The wind was going to this breeze here, as you can see. It was probably a 3 or 4 goal breeze. It was that strong. So it took us a while to navigate that, but in the end, we cracked the game open, which was nice. But I think that was one of Freo's best games of the year, to be honest. They're a really talented side, so we definitely had our work cut out for us.
Look, if there's one side that knows how to counter wind, it's Melbourne, with, you know, your history at Casey Field. But it hasn't been all smooth sailing for you guys this year, despite the fact you're sitting quite comfortably in the top 4. I think inconsistency within a game has been a bit of an issue. Like, has that been a focus of the club, of having strong 4-quarter performances as the season progresses?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it has been something that we have, it's been on our notice board, consistency. And at times throughout this season, we've wavered from that. And I think in order to be the best team, we need to make sure we nail that, and we still haven't quite done that yet. So there's still so much room for improvement over the next 3 rounds, and we'll need to be at our consistent best in order to make sure our finals are a successful campaign.
And you'll get a big task on Sunday when you do meet the Western Bulldogs in the Hampson Hardeman Cup. They're coming off 2 losses, but prior to that, the 4 wins. How do you tackle this game?
Oh, I think the Bulldogs and the Dees have had such a history together in women's football. It's been going on for years, even before AFLW existed and season 1 commenced. The history behind these 2 teams in the Hampson Hardeman Cup, there's just so much to play for, and it'll be great to have our turn at Casey Fields. We've been at Whitten Oval for a few years now for this game, so at Casey it will be great. And I think the Bulldogs have had a fantastic year so far. So every game at the moment is heating up, because when you're in the end of the season, and percentage matters, your wins matter, but also how close and how many goals you let in, Sarah, as well.
Yeah, and the Bulldogs midfield, Libby, I'm sure that's going to be, you know, top of the, you mentioned the notice board, I reckon that'll be top of the notice board this week. You know, Ellie Blackburn, Kirsty Lamb, but also Isabel Pritchard and Elizabeth Georgiou-Stathis. You know, they're really developing quite a deep core there.
Absolutely. I think they're one of the sides that have gone young from probably 2018, 19 onwards, and now they're seeing the benefits of that, and the continuity between all those young players is so exciting for the Bulldogs.
Let's head now to our deep dive. And one of the biggest topics this year, of course, with 18 sides now in the competition, has been the equalisation and the distribution of draft talent. Matthew Clark, the Adelaide coach, he touched on that topic on Friday.
Yeah, look, I mean, obviously, expansion sides in this year in particular are going to find it more challenging because the lead time into their season was so short. But I think it'll rebalance really quickly, as we just spoke about the talent that they've had access to through the draft. Those players in 2 years' time are going to be the standout players in the competition. So it'll redress relatively quickly, I think. The state-based issue is an interesting one to keep exploring, but I think that, I mean, if you take Queensland for instance, like their pathway is elite, and they've just got a flood of talent coming through. So I think basically for New South Wales, we've got to look at what they're doing north of whatever that river is, and replicate it, because clearly there's a model there where in a non-traditional footy state you're able to generate talent.
What river is he looking for there, Sam?
I think it's the Tweed River from memory.
But a very measured Matthew Clark there, and you were at the Showdown, and of course you were at that press conference. How did you lean into this topic of conversation?
Yeah, well, the Crows haven't conceded a goal in 2 matches. So that was the lead into the question. Like, it's obviously an incredible effort on behalf of Adelaide, but it's a little bit of concern, when it comes to competitive balance within the competition. I think, in classic Matthew Clark form, he was very measured and very composed. And I think his message of patience is one that we do need to remember, that there are, there are always going to be great teams. There are always going to be poor teams. But I think if you look, in the middle of the table, things aren't quite as dire as they seem, Libby.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a narrative that is existent in all leagues, in all sports, and particularly our AFL men's. I think people forget that every week there's nearly a blowout in the men's comp, and it's not dissimilar. The only dissimilar thing, Nat, is that the men's clubs have been around for 100 years. And yes, part of those 100 years, they've been part-time and then full-time athletes. But teams like Sydney, Port Adelaide, they've been around for 4 months. Yeah. We can't expect the world from these teams just yet. So I think patience, time, but also these clubs have selected young talent for the future, not for now, not necessarily for now. So we've got to have that eye for growth and where these teams are going rather than what they are now.
And Scott Gowans made an interesting point a few weeks ago. The Swans came down to Melbourne for a mid-season camp, if you will, and he said, well, we didn't get the opportunity to have a pre-season camp.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's how raw these squads are. They're still learning about each other.
Do you think, though, Sarah, perhaps the biggest issue for concern is in New South Wales? I mean, we've seen even in the men's competition, the Swans and the Giants have academies for this same problem because it's a rugby heartland. It's still hard to procure talent from that state. Do you think that's still where the biggest issue is? And do you think moving forward, do they need to follow the Queensland model?
Yeah, so there's a few issues at play here. There's, there's the cost of living in Sydney. That's always been an issue, men's and women's, particularly emphasised in the women's because of the part-time nature of the competition. So it's harder to attract, girls from Victoria, for example, to come up and play, and fill that gap in the short term. But the Queensland talent pathway is a really interesting point from Matthew Clark because, it's a rugby state, but they're almost a full generation ahead of New South Wales when it comes to talent development. Some of the names who have come through, if we're going back to the start of AFLW, you had Astor O'Connor and Sam Virgo. Jade Progelli was a star junior in the Queensland pathway. We forget that Katie Brennan's a Queenslander and Taylor Harris. Tani White was one of the first ones to make the move and be sort of poached out of the state. And then, of course, the stalwarts of the Lions in Shannon Campbell and Brie Conan. So, as I said, they've sort of been a generation ahead of New South Wales in how they've invested in women's footy and how they've marketed it to young females to come and play the game. So there is a pathway there to be followed. It's just going to take some time in New South Wales.
Now, we mentioned off the top that there were so many close games this previous round, and one of those was between Collingwood and St Kilda. And Libby, we really saw the ecstasy and the agony in the final couple minutes of play. Nick Stevens missing a goal from point-blank range. And then, of course, the ball, it goes down the other end, and Eliza James, she snaps an incredible goal. But look at Nick there. She is absolutely devastated, and we can see how late it is in the game. How do you pick a player like Nick up during the week? And you've got to give credit to Collingwood there, because that is an incredible goal.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, Nick, there's no doubt she'll know that she was in prime position there to kick the goal, and unfortunately it was just poor execution, and that happens so many times in training and in games. But what I want to point out is that it's a team game, and the fact that, yes, Nick Stevens missed that goal, but what is everyone else thinking in the lead up to those last 1.5 minutes? The ball has to have had transitioned from their forward half to the other forward half of the other team, and there's so many other players that could have had an impact on that win. They were ahead. So the defence of St Kilda, in the end, let them down because, unfortunately, Nick Stevens' goal, yes, would have got them the win, but they also had chances to still win the game.
Yeah, so Michaela Can, excellent clearance work, just grabbed the ball and got it out there. But Eliza James had held her width really well and was unmanned. So, you know, there was a couple of other errors in there that I think the Saints will be looking at rather than just a skill execution issue. Yeah.
Eliza James, certainly a star. And speaking of star power, well, we have to go to the Adelaide Oval. Sarah, you were there, Chelsea Randall. It was a masterclass.
It certainly was, and I think Chelsea came with a point to prove. She kicked the opening 2 goals of the game, and didn't she celebrate in style? We know that Chelsea's a really passionate player, but we rarely see this sort of, you know, pride in her side from her, the way she's, you know, pulling at the jumper and really getting around the girls. So opening 2 goals, as I said, when the game was at its peak in the contest. And then 27 disposals throughout. She's really taken her game to another level. She's sort of playing... I think the question was, how are Adelaide going to replace Erin Phillips? Well, Chelsea Randall's a fairly handy person to play that midfield forward role with Tia Charlton going the other way and going forward midfield when required.
The Crows are going to come up against the Dockers this weekend. Libby got a very good look at them. They're 17th at the moment, but they're probably the best second-last team we've ever seen.
Yeah, I actually think that they're coming into some really good form. It's just taken them a little bit of time to work out their new structure. Now, Sarah, we caught up earlier in the year on the W show and spoke about the exodus for Fremantle. But I think they've really found their niche now, their game plan, their style. They've had a few games together without those players, but they've really been able to hit their straps. And I think this is going to be a really strong game from both teams. And Adelaide will have to turn up and play to win, because I think Freo are hunting every team that they come up against, and they're just getting better and better throughout this season.
Now, one game I am looking forward to is Saturday, 5:10 p.m. at Arden Street Oval, North to meet the Lions. Sarah, there's mouth-watering matchups absolutely everywhere we look.
Yeah, so North Melbourne are just sitting outside of the top 4, so this is a super important game for them. They do have a healthy percentage, but the Lions are really the queens of the pack at the moment. And you see, you know, we're talking about the midfield matchups here. There's some really quality players. Kathy Spark definitely has the athleticism and endurance to run with Jazz Garner. Jenna Bruton's really flying under the radar as per usual, but is coming into some great form. The rucks, a really interesting situation. Talia Hickey is in excellent touch, coming up against the double act of Rennie and King. But then around the ground, I think the Roos are going to have to be very wary of Brisbane's forward line, Lib. You know, they've got Jessie Wardlaw down there. Dakota Davidson's playing that connecting role sort of a bit higher up the ground. But then if the ball hits ground level, you've got Greta Bodie and
they've got a good balance.
Potter. Exactly. So who do you think are the Roos who's going to have to really step up in that back line?
Well, I think it's going to have to be a team defence, in all honesty, because the way that the Brisbane Lions play is they use those taller players to get the ball to ground, and then those small players like Bodie and Hodder get to work at the contest. So it's really going to have to be about work rate from the wings, particularly, and also the midfielders to fill the space in the 50, because the Brisbane Lions forward line is a very well-connected group, and their mids know how to activate that sort of forward line surge very, very well.
So it'll be, I think Jazz Ferguson and Sarah Wright will be the ones, you know, they can play tall, they can play short. They're going to have their work cut out for them. But Brooke Brown's hitting some really nice form as well. So I'm really looking forward to this one. It's a marquee game of the round.
All right, well, when it comes to the expansion sides, we've got to show a bit of love for Hawthorn because they have won 2 games in a row. They've actually won the same amount of games as Essendon, which is incredible when you think where both of these list builds began. And Sarah, they've kind of taken a bit of a diversion path in the last couple of weeks. They've gone more for youth, and we're seeing some of these older Hawks on the sidelines.
Yeah, full credit to Beck Goddard for working out this isn't working, and B, actually doing something about it, because it's pretty easy to just back in your senior players. But Sarah Perkins and Kate McCarthy can't get a game at the minute. Caitlin Ashmore missed this one through injury, but she's been a mainstay of the side. But it really has been the work of Jazz Fleming here. You can see Charlotte Basker and Lucy Wales in the ruck is really coming into her own as well. And then you've got some slightly older forwards in their early 20s who are just getting their opportunity at the top levels. So Talia Fellows and Sophie Locke. They've been well supported by Aileen Gilroy coming out of half-back and pushing further up the field. And I think Gilroy's right in the running for Hawks best and fairest as it stands.
So they meet the Power this weekend, Lib. Should they be victorious, it'll be 3 games in a row, which just would be incredible. But do you give them a good shot?
Oh, absolutely I do. I think they've found their ball movement over the last couple of rounds, particularly as you saw from those edits there. They're just getting the fast ball movement happening, which is giving the likes of Talia Fellows, who kicked 3 the week before and a couple last week as well, just getting on the end of it, and it's shaking team's defence. So I really love the way that Gilroy plays. She's just such a high metres game player, and I think they've found their method. And it shows by the way that they've performed against West Coast last weekend in a really tough conditions. They were able to score into the wind. So I think that shows the level of growth they're having.
And it's 2 weeks in a row now that they've come from behind after giving up 4 goals in the first quarter. So, if you're a player, what sort of confidence do you take out of that?
Oh, it's huge. And you could see the confidence in the eyes of the Hawthorn players on the weekend after the first quarter wasn't great. But they were like, hey, we've done this before. We've come from behind. We know how to do it. And those are the things that new teams need to experience in order to become great teams. And I think that Hawthorn are well on their way.
Let's head to the buzz now. And Lib, we begin with some of your fine handiwork, I do believe. Of course, your team was in the West, and there you are getting some ice creams. And Sarah, they're in the playing kit. What's going on?
Full kit. You reckon you might want to go incognito after beating up Freo. But then, of course, Emily Goodser, it was great to see her make her return to the top-level footy.
And would you believe this is Carlton coach Daniel Harford from a show called Live and Kicking in the 90s. I do not know what is going on, but Lib, can you imagine Mick Stanier pulling those kind of moves?
No, it'd be shocking, and it would be played every week at the club, no doubt. So he'd be receiving a huge fine if we got that.
I'm sure this is getting a run at Icon Park at the minute.
Yeah.
Well, Carlton girls, if it's not, you've seen it, so put it on before every training session. Now, what we're looking forward to in round 7, Sarah, do you want to kick us off?
Yes, I'm really looking forward to seeing if the Tigers can notch their 5th straight win in a row. I think they've got a good shot against the Eagles. It'll just come down to injuries allowing, I think.
I'm really looking forward to the run home for the finals. I know that this week is an important week, but then we've got 2 more weeks, and I think teams like Gold Coast and Essendon are right on the cusp of those final spots. So I am really looking forward to that, particularly keeping an eye on the percentage, because that's going to be really important for all the top 8 contenders for home finals and things like that.
Well, I'm looking forward to the first country game between Essendon and Geelong. Of course, this is a feature in the men's. It's going to be played at Warrnambool at Reed Oval. You know I'm a good country girl, Sarah, so just
when
getting in
I
touch
think
with
of
my
you,
roots.
Sarah, I think of the country. Not at all inner city. You're a country girl, aren't you?
Yeah, Albert Park 3206. That is me. Libby, thank you so much for joining us on the W Show. Good luck on Sunday.
Thanks, Nat.
Sarah.
Oh, yeah.
You've been calling me that. Sarah, that's all right. We both do have brown hair. We're both in the same host chair. And Sarah, I believe you've got some days off later this week.
I do.
So you enjoy that.
Thank you.
Kick your feet up, because it's going to be a massive weekend of women's footy. Thank you so much for joining us on the W Show. Of course, women's.afl and the W app for all the latest in the world of women's footy.